All right. So it may not be 10 or 15 minutes today. I will say that that last webinar, I we started talking about forgiveness and accountability, and I absolutely loved just kind of some of the discussion that we were able to have there. I think it's such a difficult one. And so obviously I'd love to jump into any questions or whatever, certainly around that. What I think today, what was kind of coming to my mind really was the importance of in repairing conflict within relationships, or even in just having healthy connection. Um, what really gets stressed, um, I think the most as I'm working with couples, is the need for accountability. Um, And I think I've talked a little bit about this before, how sometimes we are over accountable, sometimes we're under accountable in an effort to try and manage relationships or manage emotion within our relationships. And I think that as I'm working with people, understanding what a healthy level of accountability is, it can really be difficult, especially if we've learned our entire life to not be accountable, or we've learned our entire life to be over accountable. Um, and typically, when we're not being accountable, we are trying to repair the relationship. It doesn't work. But if we're not being accountable and we're saying, "Hey, I didn't do that. I didn't. Um, I wasn't trying to make you feel this way. If you only understood what I was really doing, you wouldn't feel so hurt." Right? We are trying to manage the other person's emotion so that they feel better, so that we feel better, so that our attachment and our connection stays. If we're being over accountable and we make, "Oh, it's all my fault. I'm such a terrible spouse. You're right. If I hadn't done this, then you wouldn't have been so upset. So it's all my fault." Right? Again, we are trying to take the accountability unhealthily, trying to manage the emotions of our partner, and to essentially repair the relationship. The problem is when we don't have a healthy accountability, our um, we don't actually have connection. And so that's one thing I think a lot of people really struggle with, is that accountability is the key to connection. Um, and we need to learn, which is very difficult, not to be accountable for things that aren't ours. So I can't be accountable for how I made you feel, but I can learn to be accountable and say, uh, what I did, I don't understand why it made you feel this way. Teach me, right? And as you teach me why my behavior made you feel sad or hurt or lonely, then I can own, oh, I did this. And now that I've owned that I've done this thing, I can see how I've impacted you. Um, if I were to try and stress as much as possible, it's learning to be accountable. I did not, uh, I did not, I'm trying to think of a good example. Uh, when I've uh, not done something that I committed to do, right? I did not, um, trying to think of something simple rather than making it too complicated. But if I told my wife I I didn't take out the trash, you are absolutely right. But to her, in that moment, because I didn't do what she asked, what she a need she might have had, it might feel in the moment that I don't care about her. So I can own, you're right. I totally did not do what you asked me to do. I can see why that impacted you the way it did. You did not feel loved and cared about. I was, and so I can own that I've impacted you the way that I have, right? maybe that's too simple of an example. I realize our relationships are often much more difficult than that, but sometimes we get so caught up in the content, the simple things, that we miss where basic accountability becomes so important. So uh, I would love to talk about accountability today. I'd love to talk, we can talk more about some of the concepts we went over last time, which is, forgiveness. So I'm all ears. Scott, what do you got?
Um, you know, you came up with the taking out the trash example, and it threw me back to my childhood. That was my job, and one day I didn't do it, and my mother, had gone to bed, and my mother woke me up and said, you didn't take the trash out. You need to take the trash out. So I thought it was morning, so I took the trash out, and then I went back in and showered and got ready for school. But it was 11:30 at night. And my parents were just laughing, and I was just, So anyway, that has absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about today.
Actually,
except I forgot to take the trash out.
Well, no, the interesting part about it is I think on the opposite side of that, when people aren't accountable for the things that, like, we've asked them to be accountable for, because I started, as you said, that was my job as a kid, and occasionally there are certain jobs like, for instance, taking care of the lawn, mowing the lawn. One of my kids, that's their responsibility ish, right? And there are times when it doesn't get done, and the first thing that comes up for me is I'm not appreciated as a parent, I'm not valued, I'm not respected, right? And so in that situation, who knows what exactly your mother was feeling when she noticed that you didn't do your chore, but most likely you didn't say, you know what, I want my mom to feel like she's not appreciated and valued, and so I'm not going to take out the trash, right?
Yeah, that's I was just a kid and didn't take the trash out.
Right. And
Yeah,
and and to be honest, I think a lot of the times when we don't show up on a basic accountability thing, we aren't cognizant of how it's impacting the people around us. We're just thinking, oh, I just didn't do it. I got distracted, and I totally blew it. Um, so I think it's important to realize that, again, oh, I can see, like, both sides. Where accountability is really important, it wouldn't have been good potentially for your mom or your dad in that case to take the trash out for you and just, oh, I just want to avoid a fight, right? I think it's the comical piece is that you got ready for the day. Uh, but the reality of it is that I think that is such a common occurrence for us, where either we're on the side of needing accountability from somebody else, or we are not being accountable as we said we would be, and
and,
how important that is.
yeah, and it really goes both ways. I always, part of my recovery is I try to keep my commitments when I make a commitment. But I also have to look at myself and say, I didn't used to keep my commitments at all. I would make a commitment to go to dinner and not show up, and people would call me, and I'd say, oh, I'm not feeling well, because I was drunk. Um, you know,
Well, you weren't feeling
just
well.
saying. But so now I try to keep my commitments, and I do a lot of. I'm a writer, which I think most of the people here know, and I do some of what I do is ghostwriting. So I have commitments to clients, and I'll get them something on time, and they're supposed to edit or make their changes and get it back to me so I can clean it up and send it to their publisher, and they don't do it, and it makes me feel like, oh, they don't value me, what I do is not important, all of it, blah 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 blah. they're just really busy people. If they weren't busy, they'd do the writing themselves. That's what they're paying me for. And, it's got nothing to do with me. And I always have to remind myself, they're not angry with me. They're not, they don't think I did a crappy job, none of that. But, that's my immediate first reaction is I screwed up somehow.
Yeah.
Or they don't value me, or they don't care about me or like. So yeah, I think it's natural. And I like that you pointed that out about my mother. I never thought of it that way. I was just mad that she woke me up.
Oh, totally. And oh, it's interesting how we impact each other. And it's funny because you were using the example of, when they don't respond back like I expected them to, when they don't maybe fulfill their side of the bargain, if you will, then it must be that they don't care about me, right? We all have a series of beliefs that we've created, and um that is how we live in the world, right? We have things happen to us throughout life, and we have to make sense of it. And so we start to develop these ideas that, for instance, people who care about me, um, will respond back when I send them the piece that I've written to them, right? And so we have these core beliefs, and we create all of these rules that then fashion how people must be thinking and feeling. And it takes a bit of work for us to stop and go, okay, what's the real reason they haven't replied back? Is it that they don't care about me? Or is it that they're really busy, which is why they're hiring me as a ghostwriter, right? Like, you were able to sort that out, but the logical brain doesn't immediately grab that. Like, we have to spend time to recognize, like, no, logically, my emotions are driven by my desire and need to connect, my desire and need to feel appreciated, right? Whatever those things are for us. So I think it sounds really good that you're recognizing that and sorting through it.
A lot of work went into that. So,
Oh,
but yeah, and I think what Matt is saying applies to any relationship, especially couples relationships. We need to sometimes recognize that there might be more to it.
I would say there's
Not just
always.
yeah. So we got some questions here. Let's go to our questions. This one says, why is it that addicts begin to hide or lie about all sorts of little things, even things that don't have to do with their addiction? Very good question. My husband once hid the fact that he got a speeding ticket. This triggered me, and I dug into his social media and found he was having an emotional affair. Finding the affair only reinforced my need to continue digging for info. Why couldn't he just be honest about the ticket? Ironically, I wouldn't have even known about the affair had the ticket not issued or not triggered my distrust.
Such a great question. Um, so here's the interesting thing is that, I mean, I could isolate this just to addicts, but the reality of it is, why do any of us hide or lie about all sorts of little things? Now, there are many of us who don't, and we've learned not to, or we never had to. Typically, people that lie or hide learned at some point that that was a survival technique or a survival mechanism. That, I mean, to make it simple, I think it's our shame, right? We're embarrassed by little things. We're embarrassed by mistakes we've made, speeding tickets we've got, the reason why we were late. I mean, man, I can remember years ago, when I was less healthy than I am now, being late for a meeting, and everything inside of me, oh yeah, traffic was bad. And I'm like, I sure hope nobody came from the direction I came, because traffic really wasn't that bad, right? And I was just embarrassed. I was ashamed. Um, Now with addicts, I think shame can be so high that anything. It's essentially, they can't, I think, often recognize that there is basic humanity in all of us, that we all have shortcomings, we all have struggles. And so you'll tend to find maybe an addict who wants to hide everything. And I mean, thankfully, in an effort to do so, you're able to trust your instinct and realize something doesn't seem right here. It's a ticket. Why are we lying about this? Like, it happens. And so then you start digging in because something isn't right. And so I love that you trusted your intuition and you start digging into that. And so, because the reality of it is, when we're not living healthy, we expose ourselves everywhere. We expose ourselves when we're rude to a waiter or a waitress, right? We expose ourselves when we're mean to some random strangers. We're yelling in the car when they cut us off, right? Like, we expose ourselves all the time. It just so happens that when somebody's lying on a regular basis, they're lying typically everywhere. And so then you're able to dig in and discover some of the deepest lies that in this case he was hiding. And then it really gives you a ton of insight as to how much shame he's dealing with. And obviously the shame, in that sense, he deserves to feel, because he's not living in a healthy way. Now, nobody deserves to feel shame. We want people to get healthy, but when we're living unhealthy, we're going to feel guilty about it. So I hope that answers that.
Yeah, I think, I was thinking, because I'm cheating and I don't want you to know, I need to be perfect in every other aspect of my life. I need you to think I'm the perfect husband because I don't want you to find out about the one really awful thing I'm doing that I really don't want you to know about.
Right.
So there's that, and there's the shame that just causes us to lie.
Right. Where you look at, like, a healthy person is able to be vulnerable about their shortcomings, not be proud of it, but able to say, hey, I struggle. I'm struggling right now to feel like I have worth. Right? Like, a healthy person is able to recognize that rather than bury it, try and feel better about themselves by getting attention from an emotional affair on social media or what have you. A healthy person is able to be vulnerable and show you their weaknesses, right? You find somebody who puts on a very perfect image, who isn't vulnerable about their struggles, and you're going to find somebody who's typically burying something very deep. Who's not living very healthy. So I always get really nervous when I go, this person has no vulnerability and just appears to have it all together. That really makes me nervous, which is why I think your instinct triggered you to go, there's more going on here. Why would they lie about something trivial?
Yeah, and my experience with addicts, having been one and working with them all the time, is that if you catch one lie, there's probably 10 or 12 more that you're going to find out if you just scratch the surface a little bit. And I feel your pain when you dig a little bit and it's like, holy cow, all this stuff is going on, and you get hit by an emotional bus. It just gets all dumped on you all at once. That's horrible.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, I would encourage anybody, like, if you are noticing lies, I think I've said it on here before, and I'll say it now just because I have no idea who's listening for the first time, that we know from research that it isn't the emotional affair that's the most painful. The most painful thing in a relationship are the lies. Because if they were truthful and they came forward and said, hey, I need you to know I've been doing something terrible, I've been having an emotional affair, or I need you to know because I know this is going to hurt you, we can deal with the pain from from bad choices. What we can't deal with are lies, because that eats at the foundation of trust in a relationship. If you don't have trust in a relationship, it's essentially hard to have a relationship. Right? How do you have interactions? How do you ask somebody to show up for you? So rebuilding that trust can be so slow and painful because trust is at the core of what a relationship is.
Yeah, if you're lying to me about this, which is really important, what else are you lying to me about? And that's,
Oh,
that's where a betrayed partner's head goes. So it's like, is our whole relationship a lie? Can I trust anything you ever said or done?
yeah.
And, as the cheater, it's like, what do you mean? Can you trust anything I've ever said and done? Of course I love
Yeah.
you. Of course, blah, blah, blah. But, it, you lied to me about a speeding ticket and you kept an emotional affair secret. What else don't know? Not
Right.
know.
You've also told me you love me. Do you really love me? You've also told me that you went on this business trip. Did you really go there? You also, I mean, it's everything comes into question because now I don't know what I can trust and what I can't trust. It's the most awful feeling to it essentially makes you question all of reality. What like is it even possible that we have ever had a real and healthy moment together, right? Now the person who cheated or is in the addiction is going, yes, I can easily distinguish which things I lied about and which things are true, and I can't believe you're even questioning, right? And the hard part is they don't have any concept of how, because they've been able to typically uh, uh, compartmentalize those things out, right? They're able to determine the true fact from fiction. They're able to determine because they've been compartmentalizing it the whole time. So to them, they're frustrated. Well, I don't understand why you can't see. Yeah, I don't have to live my life compartmentalizing everything. I don't do that. What you see is what you get. I'm a fairly real and open and vulnerable person. So now, of course, I'm going to question everything. So that ability to see and understand each other is really difficult at that point.
I love this next question. Please explain to me how another person is not responsible for how they make me feel.
Oh, that's
I
it's
love
a
it.
good question. And there's a part of me that immediately wants to go, oh, that's not what I meant. I'm so sorry. And the reality of it is, this was something that took me quite a while to understand as an individual as well as a clinician. And what I have learned is that no one's responsible for how I feel. They in fact, no one technically can make me feel a certain way, but they are responsible for what they did that impacted me or influenced the way I feel, right? I've got way too much history in this life, even though nearly half my life I've been married to my wife, but so much of how I have learned to process my emotions in this world came because of how I grew up. And um, I'm trying to think of a good example, but I had to learn that I see the world through my filters. And my filters were put into place because of 1,000 different people that I've come into contact with and had relationships with. And so for me to say to one person, you are responsible for how I'm feeling right now because you did this thing, would be kind of irresponsible, right? Like I can say, hey, when you did this, I'm feeling sad, hurt, and betrayed. And I have every right to feel that way, right? They don't have a right to tell me that I shouldn't feel the way I feel. So that's really important. Make sure that you know that your feelings are totally valid. You have every right to feel the way you feel. But putting the entire responsibility upon someone else isn't um, isn't healthy. But you can say, I can say yes. When I said this thing to you, I can. If you teach me, I can understand why when I said this to you, I made you feel this way. I can tell why I impacted you. So And I think it's important for me to own that. I can own that I did this, and that it caused you to feel hurt or sadness or embarrassed or whatever it is you're feeling. So I will own that I impacted you, and that is so important. But I can't own that all of your life experiences that have caused you to interpret the world this way are, in this moment, my fault. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the example I use for a question like that is, when I was little, my mother would use what I call debate and switch. I'd be playing in the backyard having a good old time, and she'd say, "Oh, do you want to go to McDonald's for lunch?" And I'd say, "Oh, well, yeah, of course." So we'd get in the car, and then, "Oh, we just need to stop at the upholsterers to, it's on the way." And then, "Oh, well, so and so lives here. I need to talk to her." Oh, and 4 hours later, we haven't been to McDonald's. I'm hungry, cranky, grouchy, and and now we have groceries in the trunk, and the ice cream will melt if we stop at McDonald's, so we have to go home, and there's no McDonald's. And I carry that with me. And if somebody pushes that button, even a tiny little bit, I used to go off until I finally, in therapy, got walked through it. Like, somebody made me go back and understand that, I'm on a date and we're having a really good time, and my date, just wants to stop in the store for real quick and pick up, some bagels for the morning. And I'm like pissed off all of a sudden. And, it's not, that person is not responsible for what I'm feeling. My mother is responsible, or I'm responsible for what I'm feeling, for not recognizing that this person isn't my mother. This is really not a big deal. But,
Right. And we
but it
have
doesn't stop me from having those feelings.
Yeah, and we have to be careful, because sometimes if we look at it and we say that person who stopped to get the bagels isn't responsible for how you're feeling, I'm responsible for how I'm feeling. I don't know, that's a tough one for me sometimes, to say, well, I'm fully responsible for how I'm feeling, because the truth is, I don't know that I can help how I feel. And I can look and see that the way that my mother treated me impacted the way that the bagel situation caused me to feel. The only thing I can be responsible at this moment, at best, is how I respond to these feelings, right? And I don't, again, let's say the bagel person very well. I can stop and say, "Hey, can I share something with you that I'm realizing about myself?" Um, Obviously, if it's a first date, I don't know that I recommend this, right? It would depend on the strength of the relationship that I have with the person. But I realize in this moment, I feel like I'm 10 years old. And I realize I've got all these emotions coming up. And when we stopped for bagels, it gave me this sense that what I need and want isn't important to me, right? And so in that moment, I start taking ownership for what I'm feeling, how it's impacting me, and what I want to do with it. Because what I want to do with it is just be angry. And why? I want to be angry for that little boy who's sitting in the back seat, who hasn't been fed, which, mind you, adults struggle to go 4 hours without eating, or go 4 hours past a meal. A kid is even worse, right? And so it's realizing, right? I have been impacted. You have impacted this within me. Can I be vulnerable and share with you how it's affecting me? What can I choose to do with it? That's the piece that we're responsible for.
Now, after I've shared that, or you shared that, or whoever, with the other person, if that other person continues to engage in that behavior, where maybe they're responsible at that point.
Yeah. So even, I mean, and that's a rough one, right? Because it depends. A lot of times we want to look and say, you've engaged, like you're doing this on purpose. I've told you, you're doing this on purpose. We want to almost put that responsibility on them. You know how I feel, and yet you continue to do it. And the difficulty we run into there is um, yes, they may not be being accountable for it, right? Or we might think they should never do it again. Now the truth is they just need to be more sensitive to it. Hey, I know it's tough for you when you feel like you're being pushed off or manipulated, but the truth is I need bagels again. And so it would be very convenient if we stopped and got bagels. Scott, can we do that tonight, even though it might make you feel a little bit uneasy or frustrated? And at that point, you have the option to say, you know what? Sure, let's get bagels and let me work through that disappointment. Or no, I'd rather we not. Uh, and I'm sorry. I hope that's okay. You know?
And I think this dynamic happens a lot with couples around, like our first question brought up, lying for no reason, especially. You know how much it hurts me when you don't tell me the truth or when you cover something up, and yet here you are covering up something. Well, I didn't think it mattered. You didn't really need to know that I ran into some. There's that dynamic, and it's really complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, it's so tough because we all come into our relationships with so much history, and it's even worse when if somebody comes into the relationship with an addiction that they're hiding, because the layers and layers of complexity around their issues and the way that they impact people become so much deeper. So it's such a tough thing.
Okay, let's go to our next question here. What are your thoughts on filtering and accountability software? And then with that, if you're going to do it, how do you choose an accountability partner? Um, I assume that's an accountability partner for the software, but it could also be an accountability partner in general.
No, that's a great question. So earlier on, in recovery or in doing recovery work, I my feelings and beliefs around filtering and software were probably a lot stronger. I actually think they serve a very important purpose, but we have to recognize the purpose that they serve. The purpose that they serve typically is to prevent accidental exposure. Um, and so if I'm searching the internet and browsing or whatever, that I'm not accidentally running into a site or I'm blocking ads. That's another thing that I think filtering software does really good is it blocks ads. And that can be very helpful because ads can be very maybe enticing and trigger responses. Now, the truth is, if I'm struggling with addiction and I'm surfing the internet aimlessly, I'm probably not in the best place anyway. If I'm numbing out playing games on my phone, I'm probably not in the best place anyway. And I need to be honest and accountable to people that, I'm numbing out or I'm disconnecting from my emotions. But filtering and accountability software, I think, are fantastic to prevent accidental exposure. And then the other piece is to provide kind of like a first layer or barrier um, type of defense, because hopefully it provides enough of an annoyance that the person is able to get out of their limbic place and go, what am I doing? Now, most of the people that I work with on the sexual addiction side, when they're limbic and really looking to act out, they will. And so, filtering and accountability software really won't um, prevent it, but it can provide some accountability, which I think leads to really that next question: how do you choose an accountability partner? Um, Almost always, I will suggest that the partner the person struggling with addiction does not have their spouse as their accountability partner on the software. There's several reasons for it. One of the reasons, and I talked about this on a webinar a while back, is that we want to do our best not to have a parent-child relationship with the person that's struggling with addiction. The parent-child relationship, we want to try to have a peer-to-peer relationship as much as possible. Now, having accountability software or having the accountability person, we want accountability because accountability is healthy. But if as the partner, I am looking through the software to see if there's been a slip, to see what the search results have been, it looks too much and feels too much like I'm the dad watching over the kid, or I'm the mom watching over the kid, trying to catch them. And really in that moment, it's not about being a parent. It's about me being scared and wanting to make sure that I have trust and safety in the relationship with my partner who's struggling with addiction. And so the partner, the accountability partner, if it's the spouse, isn't trying to have a parent-child relationship. They're just trying to feel safe. But when we're in that position, it's way too easy for the person with the addiction to drop down into the child role, or me as the partner to jump into the parent role. It just gets way too dicey and just too ugly, too easy to drop into that unhealthy dynamic. So, Scott, any questions or clarity on that before I jump into choosing an accountability partner?
Well, I just want to make it really clear that even the best products like Net Nanny and Covenant Eyes, they're more of a speed bump than an actual block. I am not a tech wizard. I can work around. We do, Rob and I do annual reviews of the softwares every year. They're posted on the website. You can find it if you want to. And I play with them. I test them, and they slow me down enough to that I would have to think. But they don't stop any addict from going where he wants to go. If they do, you can always go buy another phone and use it in secret. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't want to give ideas, but I mean, there are 100 ways around these.
That's the problem that I've seen over and over is that, let's say you're able to lock down a device or devices enough. You will, if you are craving enough and not using your tools and not reaching out and not getting the connection you need, you will find a way, even if it means you escalate your addiction to acting out with a live person. So absolutely use filtering, use accountability software, but recognize the purpose that it serves, not that it is that it resolves a overarching problem.
Yeah.
So
accountability partner.
All right. So now, how to choose an accountability partner? Because I think it's a great question. If it's not healthy for a spouse to be an accountability partner, then how do they choose an accountability partner? And it's finding somebody who, who won't be afraid. So I think choosing the accountability partner, I think spouses, we can talk to each other about who a good accountability partner might be. But ultimately, I think it's the responsibility of the person struggling to reach out and ask somebody to be an accountability partner. And it needs to be somebody who is who's responsible, who's basically gonna call them out, say, hey, what's going on here? Somebody who they trust and care about. This could be their sponsor in 12-step. It can be a brother or a sister. They also need to let the accountability partner know, hey, you might see some pretty sketchy search results, and it may give you more information about me than you care to know, but I am asking you to do this anyway, because I need somebody to hold me accountable. Now, with that being said, the accountability partner needs to challenge them. Hey, have you checked this in with your spouse yet? They need to be somebody who has a decent idea of what the overall picture of recovery of what recovery looks like. So the person needs to know that transparency is number one, that we are not going to hide things from a partner because we're afraid of upsetting them. They need to know that I'm going to challenge you, and I'm not going to be afraid to upset you, and that you might fire me as your accountability partner because I need to be able to challenge you. So typically it's somebody who has a decent understanding of accountability and responsibility themselves, and that is invested enough that they are pushing and reaching into the life of that person. It can be a person from church or a pastor, or but again, you've got to ask the person if they're able to fulfill that responsibility, because it can be a bit of work.
Yeah, with sex addiction, I would almost always recommend somebody who's in sex addiction recovery, because you need somebody who understands what you're doing. And, if you ask your brother who thinks it's okay to look at porn because he does it once a month for 5 minutes and doesn't have a problem with it,
Right.
he may not call you out because you tried to access a porn site. But whereas somebody who's in program, in recovery, or who's a therapist or a sponsor, or just a fellow recovering addict, they're a lot more likely to understand this is a problem for you and to call you out on it.
Yeah, somebody who has a decent understanding, and I think you make a good point. It needs to be somebody who is further along in recovery than you are, right? Like somebody who has the ability to say, hey, if I look at what you've looked at on your accountability software, meaning I see the links, or I see the search results, or I see that you've looked, if I get triggered, I can go check it in, right? Sometimes we want to, I'll ask my guy who's in my group with me, and he's in the same place I am, and next thing you know, that's not effective. I've got some one crab trying to pull me out as I'm trying to climb out of the pot. Maybe a terrible example, but it's what I got for the fly. So
one last thing about filtering and accountability software. They all have a little code. When you put your settings in, I'm allowed to look at this, but not this. I can look at ESPN, but not, porn sites. There's different levels of filtering. Somebody controls that, and it should not be the addict. The addict should not be able to change his or her own settings. The accountability partner has the password to change the settings. So it requires two people to change the plan.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, good. Okay. It sounds to me like you have even more experience with accountability software than I do. So,
we
you said you do a lot of review work.
Yeah, I do a lot of review work, and we have guys install it when they come to the treatment program. So,
okay.
Yeah. And I usually have my sponsees install it, particularly if they have issues with porn.
Yeah, I have some people that'll come to me and they're like, I forgot my PIN or the passcode to the accountability software, and so has the person I've asked, and so at this point we can't change the settings. Like, it's kind of funny because that happens.
Yeah, yeah. Those are first world problems, I guess. How do you connect with somebody with shame and do repair work? If they get passive aggressive or have a reaction when they're corrected or questioned, how do you deal with that? So, my partner has lots of shame, and when I try to have a conversation, it blows up because of all the shame. What do we do?
Oh man, it's such a good question. I'll tell you what we want to do. What most of us want to do is say to our partner or say to the other person, you're feeling shame. We want to like, hey, you're in shame right now. We almost want to own it for them. And the truth is, in that moment, we're not wrong. Like, we can see the shame just by the shift in behavior or the disconnection emotionally that's occurring. And so, most of us have gotten really good at being able to identify their shame far before they can identify it. And so I think sometimes we think we're doing them a service to call them out. Typically, when we call them out in their shame, we're really just going to induce more shame. And so I love this question, because most often the best thing to do is to actually lean in with a question. Hey, you seem really frustrated. Okay, I'm going to tell you what I see you doing. Okay, you see your voice is elevating. You seem frustrated. I don't know that I would even call out you seem passive aggressive. I would just say, hey, you seem really upset. What am I missing? What's going on for you right now? Right? So I step in with almost my confusion, or my um, the ability to, like, I step in with my knowledge that something's wrong, and that's what I point out. Hey, you seem really upset. You seem really frustrated. I am not sure why. Is it, can we talk a little bit about what's happening? Now, their first response typically is to point it back at you. Well, yeah, you said this and it's your fault. Oh, okay. So why, when I said that, did it impact you this way? Why, when I said that, did it make you feel this way? And again, well, are you kidding me? How else am I supposed to feel? Right? These are our typical responses. And so if we keep leaning back in with, okay, I get that you're feeling this way. And you're right. I'm confused. I'm not understanding. Can you give me more information? And so the more that we pull out of them, the more that they're likely that shame is going to come down. That passive aggressive is going to come down, in part because we're saying to them, I see you. I see you. I can see what's happening for you, but I'm not telling you right now in this moment what's wrong with you. And so they may take it that way, and we can then back up even further. Okay, I'm sorry you feel like I'm telling you that something's wrong with you. I don't feel like that's what's happening for me. And so I'm going to need a second to understand what's going on here, right? We just keep identifying what's happening rather than getting caught up in what happened or what's going to happen. The moment we say, you're in shame, we're typically telling the other person, this is how you feel. You're too dumb to know how you feel. Even if in that moment, they don't have the insight. You truly do know far more than they do. But you're just going to induce more shame by pointing out their shame. So you want to ask questions, empathize as much as possible, but don't own that it's your fault. Right? Just own that, okay, so when I did this, it made you feel that. Okay, help me understand that more. As you do this, you're going to draw them out more and more. And to be honest, you may not even draw them out. They may just get pissed off and walk away. They're like, I'm done. I always love this. You're being a therapist right now. And people can tell me that. And I'm like, yeah, that's my job. Right. But people tell you that, and it's like, you know what? Okay, so right now you feel like I'm being a therapist. Help me understand why that's so painful. Because the truth is, I'm learning things in therapy, so I probably am talking more like a therapist, right? So why is it, so as I try to be more skillful in the way I talk to you, why is me sounding like a therapist so painful? Well, they're probably trying to say, because you're trying to one up me, and you're trying to be a therapist, and I'm the therapy, whatever. The patient, the client, and they're saying they don't feel like it's a peer-to-peer relationship. Well, that's right. When somebody is struggling with shame, they typically don't feel like they're in a peer-to-peer relationship. And so you lean into that, right? It's always about staying present with the emotion. And let me tell you, this is a miserably difficult thing to learn how to do. The fact that you're on here, you're asking the question, it's phenomenal. But I'm telling you, this is so painful. I've told this before. I don't know if I've said it on the webinar. I would get so stuck in the disagreements and the disconnection that my wife and I would have, that I would have to literally pause for 24 hours because I could not get out of the shame in my own head, or the accusation I was making in my own mind about surely she's doing this on purpose and she knows it. And it would take me, I'm a trained professional, and it would take me 24 hours at that point before I could come back to her and say, okay, help me understand, when you said this, what were you trying to say to me? Because if I'm understanding it, you were saying this, is that right? And only then could we start to have a conversation around it, because my shame was just way too high.
To me, this feels almost like the flip side of the earlier question we have about how is somebody not responsible for how they make me feel. It's sort of, how am I responsible for how they're feeling? And the answer is just as complicated either way. I mean,
Yeah, I mean that's the hardest part. If somebody's in their shame, and it's so difficult. Let me tell you, I mean, I can think of a situation recently, a couple that I'm trying to help through this. It's so difficult because a partner has to learn to be able to stand in their place and go, I know I triggered your shame, but I am in no way responsible for it. And I care so much about you that I'm willing to stay here while you're in your shame. Now that is so hard to do because the let's say in this case, the person struggling with addiction is absolutely blaming us. It's all your fault. I wouldn't feel this if you didn't say this. And so they're spewing it all over us, and everything inside of us wants to be like, it's not mine, right? But the reality of it is we have to learn to say, I can see how I triggered it. But I'm not responsible for it. And I don't know that we need to even say that out loud. Maybe we do. But I know in our head, if we can say, I totally hit their shame button right now. And then go, hey, what did I just hit for you? Help me understand. And let me tell you, there's rage monsters start coming, let me tell you, I'll tell you everything you hit. Anyway, I hope this makes sense.
Yeah, when you said you would back away for 24 hours, it reminded me that a lot of therapists will ask their couples clients to like a respectful conflict agreement. Is that something you do, and what does that look like? And
well, in my relationship, it actually tends to work well, only because I'm the pursuer, meaning I'm the one typically like, I have to have connection right now. We've got to resolve this right now. So for me to back away for 24 hours and try and think through it was a breath of fresh air for my wife, because she felt so overwhelmed by my attack, keeping in mind that my attack is really just me trying to get connection with her. So when you're in a pursuit, when I'm the pursuer backing away for 24 hours, I couldn't have done her a better service. Now, if I'm the withdrawer and I use that, I've been told I need to back away. I'm backing away. I'm doing what my therapist told me, to a pursuer who's desperately trying to cling on to connection. It's abandonment and betrayal. And it's weaponizing therapy, right? And so we have to be tough, because I have to be careful how I answer this question, because if I give you this blanket statement that, absolutely, take 24 hours and back away, then I can weaponize therapy if I'm a withdrawer and be like, back off, I'm doing exactly what I'm told to do in therapy. You just got to go deal with this on your own. Right? Sorry, does that make sense what I'm...
Yeah, I like that distinction. I would always say there's got to be a boundary. We will meet again at this time. I will be prepared to talk to you, and actually schedule when the conversation will happen. That way,
right, and being accountable to actually follow up.
And being accountable. That way, the pursuer knows that, okay, I'm not getting what I want right now, but I know when I will get it, and that softens the blow a little bit. But yeah, you shouldn't be weaponizing therapy, which happens.
I think there's nothing unhealthy about somebody, whether they're a pursuer or a withdrawer, saying, hey, you know what, I need 30 minutes, or you know what, I need an hour, or you know what, honestly, I think I need a good night's sleep, and then I'm going to call a friend in the morning and try and sort this out, and can we talk at lunch, or can we talk tomorrow afternoon, right? Being vocal about what our need is, and honoring, hey, even, and if we're a withdrawer who's saying, look, I know that me asking for space and me going to sleep and getting a good night's sleep is going to make you feel abandoned and betrayed, maybe, or probably not betrayed, it's abandoned or rejected. I know that these emotions are coming up, and I honor that, and I want you to be aware that I'm aware of how this might be impacting you, right? I think that's really important. So the more vocal that we can be about our need for a break, that's super healthy. And I would absolutely say take that if you need it. But absolutely, Scott, the way you're telling that here's my deadline. We'll talk in 30 minutes. And when that 30 minutes is up, you're back there and you're saying, hey, you know what? I think I need another 30 minutes. I think I need another hour. I think I need a good night's sleep. But the most withdrawers are so avoidant of conflict that they just avoid and stay away. Well, that is just creating more damage. So we have to follow up with the, okay, let's have this conversation like I told you we would.
Yeah, we're gonna have to. I'm gonna have to cut us off. Our hours up is up. These are such huge questions today. These are hard questions to answer today. So
I've had a blast today. I'll be honest. I don't know that these have felt as hard. I feel like we've had other questions that I'm like, I can't handle this. Not really. But
yeah.
like there were other questions I'm like, I don't have a good answer. This to me, this to me feels, all of these questions are perfect if you can kind of start to get the nuances of them. And honestly, show up in 2 weeks and let's talk about it some more. Let's dive right back into this, because this to me feels, this is where I live. I love this stuff.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, tune in 2 weeks. Matt and I will be back, and we can pick up our conversation. So thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you,
Thanks,
Matt,
guys.
for giving us your time. And we'll see you on in a couple of weeks.
We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you. Bye.